Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian, and today in this episode, and this is our 30th episode, which is kind of crazy. Maybe we'll actually make it to the end of this thing, but anyway, today we're going to be talking about sections 81 through 83. However, there are two unpublished revelations in this mix, as well as some events that are pretty significant into why these revelations were given in the first place. And so I'm going to do my best to sort of coalesce all of this together. And because these are unpublished revelations, I hope you don't mind. I feel it's probably best just to read them off so you can hear exactly what they were. One of them is about paper. Another one is about bishops. And so very, very interesting day today. So for our first part, we're going to be doing Doctrine and Covenants, section 81 as we have it today, and an unpublished revelation. And so very interesting stuff here. So we're, again, quite out of order. This was in the mix. Section 81 was actually in the mix with our last episode. And so it actually appears between what we now would call section 79 and section 77. So the numbering is really weird here, but that's just chronologically where the Joseph Smith Papers editors have put it. The first copy that we find for section 81 of the Doctrine and Covenants is in Revelation Book 2 with the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams. There are some changes to this, and the biggest change, which is interesting to me, is that we've subbed in Frederick G. Williams instead of Jesse. This is by Oliver Cowdery's hand. So it's been, and I don't know how they know this, but it was crossed out by Frederick G. Williams. So I don't know how that line just said, oh yeah, that's Frederick G. Williams. But this is what you see here, which is, sort of this name change. And one of the reasons for this is because Jesse Gause, who this is referring to, was eventually excommunicated from the church, but also he was in this First Presidency, or as they call it, the president of the high priesthood. So that's a change there. So the other thing that is kind of a significant statement in Latter-day Saint culture is to strengthen the feeble knees. It used to be the weak knees, but was changed to strengthen the feeble knees, or the hands that hang down. This is a very indicative of the kind of service that we should be rendering as members of the church. So that change was made by Frederick G. Williams. So again, kind of a famous phrase that apparently was not in the original Revelation. Revelation Book 1 also has a copy of this, and there is kind of the same confusion over Fred versus Jesse, and so those things have been sort of blotted out and scratched out and rewritten. This is all in the handwriting of John Whitmer, and all of the changes here were made in a hand that we don't know, so we're not sure who wrote these. The next page actually ends the text for this revelation, and there's quite a bit of space here, because the following page is the explanation of the book of Revelation, so that's section 77. So they definitely knew that was coming, and so basically said, okay, we're going to stop here and put the whole explanation on one page in Revelation Book 1. So kind of to give you a bit of the chronology there and how they knew that chronology was accurate. It is section 79 in the original Doctrine and Covenants, and it does appear in the manuscript history of the church. So some circumstances leading up to this, the introductions that we get from the contemporary papers, Revelation Book 2 simply gives Hiram Portage County, Ohio, March 15, 1832. Revelation Book 1 states, revelation given to Jesse Gause, Hiram Portage, March 15, 1832. So, a little bit more clear there, but of course, Jesse was sort of stricken out of this, and it was replaced by Frederick G. Williams in both cases, in both Revelation Books 1 and 2. We don't get much from the Doctrine and Covenants, nor in the manuscript history, just kind of date and time, which I've already read off to you. So modern sections headings also show no changes. So besides the removal of the history of the church as a reference, kind of scant on the introduction to these. So from Documents Volume 2, we get from the historical introduction. On 8 March 1832, Joseph Smith appointed Gause and Sidney Rigdon as counselors of the ministry of the presidency of the high priesthood. Say that 10 times fast. While Rigdon had been associated with Joseph Smith, almost since Rigdon's baptism in November of 1830, Gause was a relatively new member, baptized sometime in late 1831 or early 1832. This 15 March 1832 revelation instructed Gause in his duties as counselor. In addition, it acknowledged Joseph Smith as president of the high priesthood and stated that the keys of the kingdom rested with him. And so this is a little bit about who Jesse is. So even though he was pretty close to Joseph, it wasn't quite as early in his sort of conversion as it was for Sidney Rigdon, but they kind of held a similar position, just to kind of give some context here. So further into the historical introduction, at a later point, sometime after the appointment of Williams as a counselor to Joseph Smith in January 1833, Oliver Cowdery replaced Gause's name with Williams in the Revelation Book 2 copy, which is the version featured below. So that's what we're reading. Someone, likely Cowdery, crossed out Gause's name as well. The published versions of this revelation in the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, the 1844 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, and the 15 August 1844 issue of the Times and Seasons all have William's name instead of Gause's. This indicates that Joseph Smith and others regarded this revelation as containing general information about the duties of a counselor, rather than instructions specific to Gause. And so footnote 7 to this introduction actually says, Williams replaced Gause, who was excommunicated in December of 1832. So later on in the same year, he's out. Now, one of the reasons why this was interesting to me personally is because almost everything that we've read up to this point, which has been these relatively short passages, these aren't section 76s, this is not the 119 verses, are all directed to somebody specifically to go to do a specific thing at a specific time. And like this is saying, we don't really regard that anymore. Just modern church culture, we will take these scriptures and, as the Book of Mormon says, liken them to ourselves. So a lot of times what we'll do in today's culture, and it seems rude, but we'll kind of ignore the circumstances and say, yeah, I know this was maybe in this case, like, okay, maybe it was for Jesse, but how about we just make this about anybody who becomes one of the First Presidency? Or maybe this applies to any counselor in a stake presidency or in a bishopric. That's how modern Latter-day Saints culturally sort of read their scriptures. And so I find this to be a very interesting concept, and sort of maybe budding is this idea of, these revelations don't really have to be only specific to that one person, male or female, whatever it is. So kind of an interesting cultural shift here, which is one of the reasons why, I might add, people felt that they didn't want to publish the revelations because they felt like they were just for them and they weren't really for the general public or even the general church membership. So that was part of the debate, which I think is pretty valid if you think about it. Anyway, so we don't really get a whole lot from the footnotes of this. The content is mostly just how a counselor should act in their office. So a couple of things that you get from that. You are to pray in public and private. You are to proclaim the gospel. And then there's this quote, which we've already talked about, which is, I have appointed you to succor the weak, lift up the hands that hang down, and strengthen the weak knees. And that was later changed to feeble knees. And so the assumption is that this is good reading for anybody called to a counselorship in the church. So this could be primary presidencies, whatever. But a lot of it is just this sort of care, this sort of private and public advocate for gospel principles and things like that. So a fairly short section there for that. And it actually moves us into an unpublished revelation, what I like to call the paper revelation. This is me personally, because I'm the amateur historian, and that's my excuse for all of this. Anyway, the earliest copy, which might be the original copy, is part of this same stack of papers we're getting that Isaac Grew donated eventually to BYU. This is in the handwriting of Sidney Rigdon, and it was kept by Newell K. Whitney. This is the same stack that we've been looking at for a while. Very, very important to church history. Newell K. Whitney actually wrote in graphite on the other side of this page, if you flip it over, command as to paper for Zion. Thus, I call it the paper revelation. It appears in both Revelation books 2 and 1, and they are both crossed out, and they were both never published. So this is kind of all you get. But we do get at least 3 copies. But we do have what we think is the original, and from the historical introduction is where I get my authority to say such things. So this is from Documents Volume 2. It says, on 20 March 1832, the revelation featured here instructed Joseph Smith to suspend work on his revision of the Bible and take paper to Missouri for the printing of the Book of Commandments. The instruction to travel immediately to Missouri allowed Joseph Smith to comply with other revelations as well. On the 1st of March, 1832, a revelation informed those who were ordained to the high priesthood that the time had come for the church to organize its, quote, literary and mercantile establishments in both Ohio and Missouri. The 1st of March revelation also instructed Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and Newell K. Whitney to, quote, sit in council with the saints who are in Zion to prevent Satan from turning their hearts away from the truth, that they become blinded. Under these circumstances, questions arose of how to provide paper for the revelations and whether going to Missouri superseded completing the revision of the New Testament. The 20th of March revelation answered these questions. Okay? And the answer was, we need paper and we need to go start the publication. And we'll get to that in a moment. So, further into this, it says, it is likely that Rigdon, Joseph Smith's principal scribe, wrote the revelation as Joseph Smith dictated it. He may then have made a copy for Whitney, but the lack of punctuation and the interlinear corrections and clarifications in the copy in Whitney's possession suggest that it could be the original inscription. So this piece of paper might be the original copy, which is kind of fun. So what is it? Well, since it's an unpublished revelation, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read out the full text. Here's what we get. Quote, first, shall we procure the paper required for our brethren in their letter and carry it with us or not? And if we do, what monies shall we use for that purpose? It is expedient, saith the Lord, unto you, that the paper shall be purchased for the printing of the book of the Lord's commandments, and it must needs be that you take it with you. For it is not expedient that my servant Martin Harris should as yet go up unto the land of Zion. Let the purchase be made by the bishop of, or it must needs be, by hire. Let whatsoever is done be done in the name of the Lord. Second, shall we finish the translation of the New Testament before we go to Zion, or wait till we return? It is expedient, saith the Lord, that there be no delays, and thus saith the Lord, for the greatest good and benefit of the church. Wherefore omit the translation for the present. Sounds pretty clear to me. So go get some paper, hire it out if you have to, and pause the New Testament while you get this done in so many words. So one of the footnotes that we get for this says, and did they get the paper and for how much? So footnote 6 for this. In September 1831, Sidney Gilbert and Newell K. Whitney were told that as agents to the church, they were on the Lord's errand, and whatsoever ye do according to the will of the Lord is the Lord's business. Soon after leaving for Missouri, Joseph Smith and his companions purchased paper in Wheeling, Virginia, which is now West Virginia. The terms by which the paper was acquired and how much was purchased are unknown. The type of printing paper most likely purchased by the group could have cost anywhere from $2.75 to $7 per ream. And considering how much things cost back then, that's quite a significant thing. So to me personally, yes, it would make sense that they would have some sort of a revelation to clarify this. All right, so there you go. There's an unpublished revelation about paper. And so when you look at original copies of the Book of Commandments, or if you look at, depictions of the young woman who saved those, that paper was what this revelation was all about. So I thought that was very interesting. So that is all that we have for this first part. Stick around for part 2. We're going to get into another unpublished revelation and a few revelations that you may know about. So stick around.